a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
The Veracity Podcast.
Discovery Sessions. Hello and welcome to the Veracity Podcast. I'm your co-host Christian, and I'm really excited to share this episode with you. I had the honor and privilege to sit down with Fran Hunt-Junnouchi, who is the executive director of Vancouver Island's grassroots organization, the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness. Fran's been working alongside her team diligently for the last 5 years on the front line to better understand indigenous homelessness and how to solve it using a dual model of care, which combines both Western science and indigenous cultural practices to optimize pathways to healing and recovery. On this episode, Fran shares some of her own personal experiences and inspirations, as well as an overview of her organization and the challenges the coalition faces. Fran was incredibly honest and illuminating, and I hope you get as much out of the conversation as I did. So, without further ado, enjoy. So, I guess I wanted to start with some of your history, because I know you have a really, really interesting story. So I don't know how far back you want to start, but yeah, the floor is yours.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I am Kwakwaka'wakw and Nuu-chah-nulth from northern Vancouver Island. So Kwakwaka'wakw is my dad's nation, Fort Rupert, and Nuu-chah-nulth is in Quatsino. That's my mom's nation. I primarily grew up in Old Quatsino. Accessible only by boat. And so I really had an incredible childhood as far as being able to live what our communities really used to be and what they are trying to strive to get back to. And I say that because in my community, we were all one big family, and there was a lot of caring for each other, a lot of spirituality. It was just very powerful. But at about age 12, we made the move to our village had to be relocated.
Seagulls on the roof, I think.
Oh.
It's okay.
Sorry. I was like, what is that behind me? You're all so calm. But
I thought Nick was scrambling over there.
Sorry.
One too many coffees.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's all right. We can.
But I really believe that my childhood is what has really led me to do what I do today for a number of reasons. Also just being raised so close to my grandparents in Winter Harbor, which is just up from Quatsino, and the so many teachings that I got. But when I was 8 years old, my grandparents went out to sea, and I really believe they went out to die after my Uncle Bobby had passed away. But I say all this really to bring forward the teachings that I had really spoke to another realm, another world. We were always taught there's this world, there's the upper world and the underworld, and just the spiritual nature of everything. So I've grown up just believing that. And I had that reaffirmed when we visited Corolla, Ambrose Place. It's a managed alcohol residence program in Alberta. And to have that reaffirmed by an elder from Alberta was so powerful, and that was just recent. So it really has, I think, moved me along towards what our main focus is now at the Aboriginal Coalition, and that's decolonizing harm reduction practice, and to really root everything that we do on the land with the traditional healing practices, with the culture, with the language, because I have come to know what I know. This is now, we're going into year 4 with the Aboriginal Coalition. And I honestly can finally say, we know what we know. I know what we know about the Indigenous street community. You know, having heard their stories, having seen those little glimpses of hope when you get them out on the canoe, or their cedar bark stripping in Goldstream, or going for a ceremonial bathe. You see it, you feel it. That's when their hearts open up, and you see that light again in their eyes that you don't see in anything. No soup line, no drumming group, not even a home. A house is not enough. That's what I want people to know, that unless we create pathways to healing and recovery that really reach into the spirits and the hearts, connecting the cerebral to the heart, I think any change will not be ongoing and not transformational. So really a lot of my childhood, what I learned, just things that have happened in my own life, powerfully and spiritually, having a deer come and sacrifice itself to us. That's a long story I won't get into now, but, you know, that happened. Or even when on a kayak trip, we got lost in the storm, and my spray skirt fell off. My hull was filling with water, and I actually just thought, this is it. We're going down. My cousin who was in front of me stopped paddling, and all I could do, I just started to sing. Hey, hey, ho, le, just started to sing and just paddle. And then all of a sudden, these two eagles came down so low, you could almost just hear the thunder of their wings. And then this voice, I'm not going to swear, but he did.
You can if you want.
No, because he said, turn the bump around. And the voice, he finally saw us. It was Mervyn, a fellow we were kayaking with. And because he had lost us, we got taken so far from the group in the storm. But at the same time that those eagles came down and we heard his voice, and then I just kept singing and followed those two eagles. And as we were entering into the arm, they sat really, really low on a rock, and they just sat. They almost were close enough to touch. And my cousin said, oh my gosh, that's your grandparents. And I'm like, oh, because that was the area that they had gone out and where the boat went down, which I think, like I said, you know, my Uncle Bobby, who they raised from a baby, had died in a house fire, and they just couldn't get the strength to get back out of bed after that, and they went out that morning. I used to sleep with them. I was 8 years old, and they said in my language, I was like, Witlasla, where are you going? And they just hugged me. I didn't fully know it then, but I know it now, that they were saying goodbye. And but anyway, she said, that was your grandparents. And I said, yeah, that was my grandparents. They led me in. They let us in. And so just so many experiences that, and I wish I could share a recent experience, because it was the first time I ever got to sit in on something so powerful on Coast Salish territory. And we did a burning. The local elder said we had to do a burning to prepare, to call on the ancestors for permission to do the work and open our house for Indigenous women. As you know, we're opening a house for Indigenous women, particularly those fleeing violence. It'll be opening in February. So I did the burning, but it isn't my culture, and I don't have permission to speak about it, but all I can say is I will be forever moved and again reaffirmed that we walk on this land, but there are many, many ancestors that walked this place before us. And I think that we can all benefit from just opening our hearts to something more than this everyday life and exhaust and noise and busyness and competition and rushing. And that's the vortex that the Indigenous street community and many of us are caught in.
Right. So if you don't mind, I'd like to visit the initial transition to the Aboriginal Coalition. Because prior to that, you were working with, was it the government?
Well, I was the inaugural director for the Office of Indigenous Affairs.
Right.
I was there for 5 years and opened up the first People's House at the University of Victoria. And then prior to that, I worked with the local nations as a director of their adult education programming. So I had no background in working with housing or homelessness. I agreed to take on a 4-month contract for the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. The director of the time came to me and said, actually what I loved about what he said was, all I know is we don't know. He said there's a disproportionate number of Indigenous people experiencing homelessness. We're having trouble getting Indigenous people to the table to engage towards solutions. And so my role was to help them connect. And at that time, he wanted me to engage with local nations, which is extremely important. It's critical, in honor of whose territory we're on. But I had a hunch that probably a lot of the people in the city that are experiencing homelessness are from this island, from one of the 3 tribal groups on the island. And indeed, that was the case once we did our first survey. And so we started by bringing people together, a committee. It took a little bit of time, the chiefs, counselors, and frontline workers that I spoke with. It certainly was not for lack of care or love, and I heard there was a pattern throughout, and it really, they expressed that they knew it was a challenge, but there's so much just happening on reserve, dealing with housing and capacity building, and so they acknowledged, yes, there's an issue. So I arranged a gathering at the Esquimalt Longhouse and just asked, different chiefs and counselors and elders to come to just sign a drum symbolically to say, we're standing together to state that there is a problem, that our people living away from home are suffering, isolated. They're facing housing challenges, and they signed the drum, and that was more or less the beginning. And the reason it was the beginning, I think, is we rented a bus and we took people from the street to join us in the Esquimalt Longhouse. And that's what started to make the connection. I think when you brought, the leaders and they met and saw the people and heard the stories, and it became real. It became real, just through this sharing of stories. And then we followed up and created a little digital story, because I went back to the street community and, asked them how they felt. And they felt so much pride. They felt so happy that our leaders came and they cared about them. And I said, what message do you want me to take back? And we created that short digital story. And I brought it back out then to the tribal groups and showed it. And it was awesome, because it was the elder women, the real leaders in our communities who started to stand up, particularly when I went out to the Kwakwaka'wakw District Council General Meeting, and the women stood up and said to the leaders, do something, get behind this. We need to get down there. We need to be involved. And that's kind of translated and moved forward to now when we're looking at decolonizing harm reduction practice. Again, it's the elders saying, we need to do it. We cannot be looking to the government for programming or try to fit into their structures. We need to create healing communities across Vancouver Island, and we need to bring the Indigenous street community to our communities, to the land, to the healers. And that's what I've been working on this year. And we're going to have our first, our winter camp in October. And thank you for agreeing to drive one of the vans.
No problem.
That's going to be very exciting, and we'll end with a potlatch on the Saturday. So, but the goal is over the next year is to create a framework on what a program might look like that is run by our people, for our people. And I think we'll start to see people jump on board and see the transformative power in what we're going to do when we just do it by ourselves. And so the trick will be to frame it in honor of whose land we're on and create it around the seasons based on Coast Salish protocols and their seasonal practices. And so it'll take some time, but I have a UVic doctoral nursing student who's going to be doing a practicum with me this year and helping to create the framework and the research around culture is healing means what? How does this connect into a framework? But how do we align Western and traditional approaches within the framework?
Right. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that based off of your survey, the majority of the homeless population here in Victoria is from one tribe in particular. Yeah.
So, out of 100, 48 come from one of the 3 tribal groups on Vancouver Island.
Okay.
And then another 19 from a nation in BC. Okay. So another reserve in BC. Mm-hmm. But of that 48, a high number come from one tribal group on this island.
Is that based off of just a shortage of housing, or?
That's what we're still trying to determine.
Okay.
I have brought the information forward to the tribal group, and I think now, depending on the work that we can do together, to address it, but it was very, very helpful. And I think, as I mentioned to you before, going back, that was year 1, so 3 years ago, we were able to counter a bit the narrative of the time, because at that time we had the tent city in front of the courthouse, and, we kept hearing on the news and media that people were being bussed from Eastern Canada and because of the good weather here. But really, when it came to the Indigenous population for that initial survey, our baseline data gathering, that's not what we found.
Interesting.
So, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also, too, I think one of your biggest challenges might be the fact that different tribes have different cultures, right? And so generally when people refer to Indigenous people, it's unified. But of course, within Indigenous people are very unique cultures with different beliefs. And so how are you going to approach that with the coalition?
Absolutely. That is a big challenge. And we are finding that with trying to plan for language revitalization in what we do, because what we heard from the elders and the medicine keepers at that gathering was the importance of language is still central, that without the language as well, a big part of us is lost. And so we held our first meeting about 2 weeks ago to generate some interest to see who wanted to go up to the winter camp. And you can't teach all of the languages. So that is the challenge of how we're going to be able to weave it through everything that we do. We do have a plan, though, but we're going to test it.
Yeah, of course.
I can't say it's going to work, but we're going to test it. I think more than anything, though, I'm hoping that through all this, we'll be able to demonstrate and just, encourage people not to think of us as like sort of this homogenous group of people where there's one practice and one understanding, because there isn't. Like I said, been here for 20 years on Coast Salish territory now, and just had the honor of being able to sit in on a very, very powerful ceremony. But the ceremonies that are held in my community, when we look at a cleansing, it's called a digita, and there's a different way of doing it versus, say, how the Nuu-chah-nulth will do it. But that's also the beauty of being able to create these healing communities up and down the island, because, bringing Nuu-chah-nulth people or Kwakwaka'wakw people, Coast Salish, Métis, is they'll be able to identify with their ancestry, their land base, and their teachings. And we hear the people getting excited about it now. It was just a couple of days ago, one of the women said, maybe I'll be able to do a family tree, and maybe I'll be able to learn, just a little bit of my language. And really 3 years ago, what we were hearing about was, how do we get out of this maze? Every day I'm in a soup line. Even our discussions are changing around the table. And so that you're on the right track, because we're talking about indigeneity, who we are, who they are. And that's where the strength is going to come from.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to dial back a bit and talk about the Priority 1 program. Mm-hmm. So that would have been 3 years ago or 4 years ago?
Yes. So the end of 2015, probably in November and December, I think it was, there was the Mayor's Priority 1 task force. And that task force came about because there were 74 people identified in our city as being the most at risk, the most vulnerable. Quite a lengthy list of criteria to meet for that. As an example, a VAT score of 25 or more. So VAT is an acronym for Vulnerability Assessment Tool. But one of the common denominators was that most of the individuals had, although people won't say they were banned from housing, because, they had housing previously, but many of them hadn't been housed in a long time. Their behaviors were such that, it was difficult. And of those 74, 20 self-identified as indigenous. And that's where we were asked to be at the table and to see if we could, provide some support and leadership, which I said, yes, we would love to, but we have to do it our way. We can't just, try the same housing or the same approaches, and was able to develop a culturally supportive housing model. And thankfully, Victoria Kool-Aid Society partnered with us, and they provided the housing units, and we provided the framework. So we brought in Auntie Glow, our elder mentor. We brought in Fred Rowland, our cultural mentor. And we brought in James Taylor. He also, did the smudging and spiritual healing, food, cultural trips. And as you know, because you did an interview and heard some of their stories, it's amazing. There was something in what we were doing that people were staying. And if you listen to the interview you did, you'll hear things like, I felt safe there. Auntie Glow, her aura, her power, the elder, the hugs. You heard people say things like, I've had a chance to get back to my native art, you know? So there was something in there, a little bit of magic happened. And we saw that, you know, we have something to build on.
Yeah.
And I think that we're able to create some leading practice. And from there, we're tailoring that model for the Indigenous women's housing.
Right. So
we're using what works there.
Yeah.
But it was out of the Priority 1 program that we are now where we're at.
Right.
Because a year and a half in, I did a lessons learned report. And in the lessons learned report, we were able to identify really 2 main areas of emerging need. And one really had to do with the safety of Indigenous women. One thing we learned was out of our cohort, the women in our group of 20 and the women in the non-Indigenous group of 54, 100% of our women, the Indigenous women, had lost their housing, not because of what they had done in the past, but because of violent partners or spouses. And we observed ourselves that there's a lot of control over a lot of the women. Women are either put out to panhandle by bullies on the street, or sometimes partners put out to street work. They're in a very precarious position and often with very little support. When I'm saying support, it's like they don't often even feel safe to turn to the organizations that are supposed to be there to protect you.
Yeah, there's a disconnect.
There is.
Yeah.
And as you know, we just held the 3-day Indigenous Women's Retreat that started out in Goldstream, and they were asked on day 2, what are your safety concerns on the street? And there were a number of safety concerns, but one of them was Vic PD. And you know, we have been building a very, very strong working relationship with Vic PD. I cannot emphasize enough how supportive and open our Chief of Police, Del Manick, has been. But it's still something that the women experience. And so I know when I approach him and we have a conversation and look towards solutions, I know he will be supportive, but it remains a reality for the women. And when asked what some of the safety supports would be to help them that we could do to help, and they had quite a list, but they narrowed it down to 3 priorities. And one is having an Indigenous woman or Indigenous women be there in outreach and support.
Right.
So there's not a lack of support services in this city. Not even really a lack of health services, but what there is a lack of, where those gaps are and where the system needs improvement, are Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous ways of being. They also asked for an app that only they could use, so they could keep in contact with one another. So I'm not sure who I'm going to approach yet, whether, I don't know, BCIT or Justice Institute or UVic, or I don't know, but I'm going to make this happen for them.
Yeah.
So they want an app, so they get to select who's part of their group, you know, who they trust, but they know they always have someone to reach out to.
Yeah. I know this the city's pretty well established in terms of its tech. and there's quite a few app developers in town. So
okay.
maybe one of them's listening.
Yes,
so.
I hope so. I hope so. I'd love to work with you to test this. And because they identified it. And it's really important. If I could just step back to year one. So we started off by gathering the baseline data and to learn, what are the challenges? Because I wasn't about to lead an organization where I, assumed that I knew the solutions, because I honestly didn't. And we held a series of 5 focus groups, talking circles, lunches, whatever you want to call them. And I just asked 3 questions. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What barriers might come up to prevent you from getting to where you want to be in 3 years? And what will support you to get to where you want to be? And the list of barriers and the list of supports, I'm just so thankful to my board of directors, because they supported me to really turn that into my job description. So in year one, I got to look at those barriers and begin to try to chip away at them, and to look at the supports based on their voices, what they asked for, and to try to make that a reality, to provide their supports.
Right.
And so we're still working on that. But, funding is probably our biggest challenge. We're doing a lot of, in my opinion, some groundbreaking work, some leading work, and we don't have any core funding. So like I was doing this morning, writing another proposal, we're constantly writing proposals that take so much time and effort to be able to do little projects. Whereas if we could just focus on the work at hand,
right,
that's to develop culturally supportive housing within the context of decolonized harm reduction practice, helping them to link to their ancestral lands, their traditions, their family lines. That's where we're going to start to see change. But so that's the reality that we're in. And it takes far too much of my time.
Right. Yeah. Can you expand a bit on cultural supportive housing and what that really entails?
If I could sum it up, it really, in the lessons learned report, and what I learned though is you can't quantify love. I know that's
your famous quote.
That's my famous quote, but it's true. Because what was clear, why were they still there? Because there are other housing projects, if you will, where there's food or maybe there's some communal space. But there was something with the sense of building family. There's also benefits of working with a cohort, because they do well when there's sense of family and community. And culturally supportive housing, though, has to have not just the practice, because there are, organizations in the city, and bless them, because they, really do want to try to bring in some indigenous content into what they do. But it's beyond having drumming once a week, or it's beyond, having a talking circle. Not to say that isn't important, but it's the being, the doing, the epistemology, our worldview, as I mentioned earlier, of there's more to this land and the history, and in the spiritual realm, and in the power of the Creator to show you things. And so culturally supportive housing, the difference that I think we are making is that we're providing that space that is safe, it's indigenous, and it's loving, our board in our retreat last year even changed our statement, because when we talked about, so what is it that we're doing, and revisited who we are, we all agreed we are lovingly providing support and services.
Yeah.
And I know that may sound wishy-washy to some people out there, but it is. It's about love and non-judgment, and recognizing that we need to hold each other up, and that these are authentic relationships. These are not clients. We all become a larger family, and you see it when we all see each other.
Right.
And we just had the beautiful pleasure of the first time moving 5 people into more independent housing out in the West Shore, because the community plan for the city now identifies 33% of all the new housing coming down through this, the CRD and the city. 33% will be Indigenous people. I mean, that is a tremendous stride that this city has taken. So there'll be 1,000 units in total. And so 300 people we're going to be able to house.
Wow.
But what was different there, we provided the transitional support for those 5 individuals. And it is different. You know, we talked about whose land it is out there in the West Shore. We met with them, you know, and had like housewarming and prayer, and anyone that wanted the unit cleansed and smudged. And so we're helping to set them up a right way. And we provided support for 3 months. But what I've come to learn is I think we're going to have to do that with everybody, because there's a real sense of isolation.
Right.
And stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to explore the gathering with the elders. So wisdom of the elders, and some of the key findings and key messages that came out of that.
Yeah. Wow, that was powerful. It really was. For me, a key message certainly came from Corolla Cunningham from Ambrose Place. And she basically said, just do it and they will come. If she had waited for the government to support their vision and their way of doing and being, it may not have happened, and they may have to have fit their circle into a square peg, right? So that has always resonated with me. And that's why I'm going about the business right now and developing this framework, but also because it came from that gathering, the need to build healing communities, and also dual models of care.
What is a dual model of care?
It's where you recognize that one model on its own, so just traditional, say, so that won't work in these, especially these early stages. We need to incorporate kind of the Western health model and what's available.
So it's a hybrid.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. But it has to start with us.
Right.
We have to, our ways needs to frame the foundation. But we recognize, so as an example, if we look at what's available right now in the city, if someone is just in really bad shape, they need some help, they'll typically go to emergency. And generally, it's kind of in one door and out the other, but they know they need help. Or they'll go to the detox center. Similarly, you know, they'll stay a few days and try again, but what happens is they just go right back into the heart of darkness, right? All the triggers, same environment. So when I say we're developing a framework, then we need to look at what is our detox? And is it detox that we're talking about?
Right.
And so that, as an example, is what we are going to look at even with the winter camp. So we are preparing because people are going to be away for 5 days.
Right.
And we know from the majority of people we're working with, the chronic alcoholism, non-beverage users as well, opioid use, that we have to be prepared for withdrawals, possible seizures. I mean, there's high risk as well. And so we have been consulting with a registered nurse, creating personalized health and risk management plans. But, that's how we're going to look at how we're going to do what we do. My thinking is that probably what's going to happen in our framework as we start with the seasons is that, here's an example, maybe for 1 month, every week they're going out to Sartlip, maybe, for sweats. And then the second month, they're now building in with doing the sweats. And another day in the week, they're going with Fred down to the river. They're, traditional plants and medicines. Right. Third month, you add on another thing. So you're slowly helping them to build their strength to stay clean. Not very likely going to stay clean for a period, but then we plan the longer intervals of being away and then going out to Nuu-chah-nulth, Cathedral Grove, Tofino, wherever. But so we would look at some of the methods that are used now and what is our way to do that, right? Yeah. And yeah.
I remember Fred said, he said that we're not going to place you in a box.
Yeah.
We're going to teach you about this plant.
Yes.
And that's all you need to do.
Yes.
Learn about this plant. And I just thought that was so beautiful, right?
Powerful.
Because of course the Western model wants to, place you in some sort of category and give you a diagnosis or whatever it is.
And Corolla touched on that, right?
Right.
She said the way they do their work at Ambrose Place, she said they don't talk to them about their trauma, their histories, anything. She said what we do is we open our arms, we love them, we get them settled, and when they are ready, it's with an elder, and an elder will work with them through their kind of chronological timeline, and when they're open and ready to say, as an example, well, maybe at age 8, this happened, or this was a good milestone that I remember, with fondness, and it's when they're ready. That in itself is really quite profound and empowering. Yes, because typically, there's forms, there's templates, and there's histories.
And there's not much contact either, right? With the Western model, right? Physical contact it doesn't happen often.
That's right.
A hug is forbidden in some cases.
Yes. Well, we were just there at Ambrose Place, and I arranged a tour and invited representatives from Island Health. Our mayor went. We had a physician, actually 2 physicians. We had people from the First Nations Health Authority. And it was a 2-day event, started in the evening with an elder for 3 hours. And he just kept hitting it home in 100 different ways that our job is to link the human self, the physical self, to the spirit. That is what's detached. And there were some very, very powerful stories and scenarios to support that. But the next day, sitting around the table, some people had their laptops, and Corolla would talk, and someone would say, "Oh, well, do you have the data for that? Do you have the statistics? What is the business plan?" And she'd say, "Oh, yeah, we'll get to that." And then someone else would ask for something, tangible, and the stories. "Oh, yes, we'll cover that."
Right.
Well, all of a sudden, it was the end of the meeting. And we were sitting there, and she said, "Well, maybe we'll close the meeting now, and we'll go around, and we'll start with you. And just, maybe share what you learned or anything you'd like to share." The physician broke down weeping.
Wow.
There were 12 of us, I believe, and probably 7 or 8 broke down crying, myself included.
Well, you're always crying.
I'm always crying, yeah. But what was what was, I think, really important was the representative from Island Health. She said, everything I've just learned here today is counter to my educational training and the on-the-job work that we do. We're always taught not to touch, not to get emotionally involved, not to, right? She said, from the moment I stepped in here, we've been learning and told it's about the love and the touching and the relationships and that human contact that everybody needs.
Right.
Yeah, that was powerful. And so to hear people go around, from various organizations, they got it, but they didn't get it right away. And it really, and Carola just handled us all so magnificently, and she let all of the stories unfold through the experience of just being. And again, it goes back to what I was saying, like, give us the chance to be, to know, to use our ways, right? It doesn't all have to be a business case with metrics.
Right, yeah. I remember Carola saying, too, that her approach was sort of the opposite of the Western approach in terms of, with the Western approach, of course, you have the experts, and they are giving the advice and directing. And with Carola's approach, it was more so, we're here to support your needs. You tell us what you need, rather than the opposite. And I thought that was really interesting.
Absolutely. And that, is similar to, like I said, with the first year. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What barriers might come up? What will support you? And then that becoming our foundational work, is really, it's acting. They know better than us. I think if you recall, I told you the story of a fellow named Rocky, who, when, asked that question, and he said, well, there's no shortage of services and stuff. He said there seems to be getting to be more and more. It's like a white tower that's building downtown. He said, but instead of giving us a map that tells us where we go on a Tuesday to eat, where we go on a Thursday to sleep on a mat, where we go to have a shower. Yes, that's all helpful. He said, but give us a map of how to get out of this maze.
I like that.
That was so telling. And it just really goes back to, I think, where sometimes we think, and we are, all well-intentioned in how we try to approach things.
Right.
But they know.
Yeah.
They hold those solutions.
Yeah. Good intentions with bad ideas.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Now, in terms of Ambrose Place, to get into some statistics, they have saved over $7 million, right? And the program has been extremely successful.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's just important to...
And that... don't quote me on this one, although I'm saying it, but I don't think that includes the justice costs, so it might even be greater. I believe that the data gathering that they did 2 years in, where they identified the decrease in use of health services, such as, ambulance, paramedics, doctors, emergency wards, hospitals, etc. Mental health, all reduced drastically for savings of that amount of money just after a few years. So, and they've now gone into palliative care. That was something Carola hadn't thought of in starting, but they continue to grow with what they learn. What's most powerful, though, is when people go there, they are told, this is your forever home. We don't do that in housing. It's typically, so if you follow these rules and do this and don't have these guests or have those guests,
Right.
at all levels, with affordable housing, supportive housing, low barrier housing. But when they move in, that's their forever home. They're not going to have to move again. They're going to be supported throughout. And that's when they seem to find themselves and they realize this is for real. This is my family.
Well, even just, the term transitional housing in itself says it all, right?
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. My understanding, too, of the indigenous approach is that at the core, it's connecting people with the greater mystery, with the land, the earth. And in turn, if you can find respect for that and honor it, at some point you realize that you are a part of that. And then in turn, you can respect yourself.
Yeah. Well, when I think of the land and how I was raised and the animals, the fish, we were always taught to respect. Even the salmon, you'd bring the bones back, and not so much in my generation, but certainly the generation before me, there would be the prayer. There was always, they never fully, when you look at cedar bark stripping, keeping the tree alive, only taking as much as you need till the next season. So we were always taught we are the land is us, and we're one part of the web of life, not above it to dominate it.
Right.
And I think that's when you see yourself in that context, I think you have this, your eyes are opened to the world in a different way.
Not seeing yourself as separate from the earth, but part of it. Right?
We are the earth.
Right. Mm-hmm. That shift in itself can be so powerful.
Yeah. And, I think I mentioned to you before, we owned a native cultural kayak, a boat rental and charter boat and all that, but we did native cultural kayak tours. And we'd leave from Cole Harbor and paddle to Quatsino and Winter Harbor. And we would always hear the same thing by the end, because we'd have the talking feather around the fire. And they'd say, it's just so different. Now I understand why the land is always talked about, but when you see it on the news, I think of it, or so this would be the person talking, as a monetary thing, because that's how I see land.
Yeah.
And so it's the natives, still wanting more land, when is it enough or whatever. He said, but what I've experienced in just the process of before we'd get out of our kayaks and go onto the beach, we would sing a song, and the song to the ancestors of that place. We would say, we're coming in peace. We would call out that we'll leave everything as is and only take what we need. And so they would do that at every location until the end destination. And they were learning a song. And on that last night when they'd pull up, we were all there, my papa and relatives, and we were all in regalia, and they'd have to sing their song saying they're coming in peace. And now all of a sudden there's all these people they've been singing to, like the forest in the beach, right?
Yeah.
But you'd hear it. You'd hear those stories, the land has a whole different meaning now. And every location had a story of either its spiritual significance, its food gathering purposes, what neighboring nation it was shared with, and how there was intermarriage. That oral history of the land is everything.
Right. Yeah. So at the Wisdom of the Elders conference, I recall an elder talking about the fact that this was an indigenous problem and that it had to be solved by indigenous people. And I just wanted to get your take on that, because from my understanding with the work that you're doing and the phrase "we are one," it seems like it has to be a collaboration, and that it can't just be solved by Indigenous or Westerners.
So the statement "we are one" speaks more to us as Indigenous people.
Okay.
That even though maybe we're serving people from Alberta, from Saskatchewan, Métis people, that we are one, and we have some common ground for sure in the way we see the world, and that we need to stand together. And when you heard someone say that it's going to take Indigenous people to solve the problem, and that they have the answers, it's absolutely true. And what that means is we have the practices to move beyond this, but none of us live in isolation anymore.
Right.
So if the foundation of what we do isn't truly Indigenous, and we're still constantly under the paternalistic kind of structural systems that are at play, where Western models have not particularly done well.
For Westerners as well, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, also in some cases too, even the people that we work with, they'll go to a treatment center and they'll come back. And so what doesn't change is the environment they come back to. Some things are just so obviously simple that it just begs the question, then why? Why do we keep doing the same thing? But I believe that we need to work together, and that's why I'm proposing that, that kind of dual model.
Right.
Because we can, as long as there is that openness and that willingness to consider there's another way to do it here, and how do we take the best of both worlds?
Right.
Or how do we walk in both worlds for the greatest benefit of the street community?
I think about some of the Indigenous people from South America, Brazil and Peru in particular, and the fact that they've opened their doors to Westerners, and they're using ceremony with very, very powerful plant medicines and healing Westerners. And I guess my question for you is, do you see the same path forward for North America, where maybe at some point after the Indigenous people have healed, that maybe you can extend that outwards to Westerners, because I think that we're all suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think that already happens in some ways. I mean, even the Priority One, I remember speaking to the manager that we were working with at the time, and there was an example, but it's kind of long. But he said, we have so much just to learn from you guys and how you're doing. Not just this program, but this needs to be shared. But going more to the medicines and the spiritual side of it, I know there's also a lot of apprehension of sharing too much.
Right. Because
we've had almost everything taken. And I know that feeling. As you know, even at the gathering, I remember you were asked not to videotape something because it was medicine. It was powerful. And so I think that there's a lot of caution in that way too, not to commercialize or not to kind of turn into, Mr. Guru, and we're going to hold these,
Right.
Because that's what happens in a capitalist world as well.
Yes.
So of course, indeed, there would be benefits and the teachings, but I am not the person to speak to how far that goes.
Yeah.
And right now, we need to learn to really heal ourselves again.
Of course.
And to share those teachings with the Indigenous street community.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that in a lot of things that we've done, we've been able to share I mean, just scientific knowledge, technology from the past too, that,
Right.
we were seen as primitive. I mean, look at just the snowshoe or penicillin or just some of those common things, right?
Yeah, clam gardens in particular.
Absolutely.
Very sophisticated.
Yes. Yeah.
So what does reconciliation mean to you?
That's almost like a double-barreled gun. Yeah. Well, honestly, I think reconciliation means different things for me at different tables.
Okay.
And the reason it means different things for me is the relationships are at different places of progress. So, ideally, it should work, but it's also a little bit of a pipe dream, because reconciliation means something comes back together, right? So like a couple, when they reconcile, they do reconcile and they agree to move forward, even though there have been those things maybe in the past that caused the issues, and each side will compromise a bit. So I see it a little bit like that. But often, too, in some of those relationships, one or even both can't forget. And the wounds are too deep. And what was taken can never be recovered.
Yeah.
And so, that's where we have to.
It was really interesting interviewing the elders at the conference, because I had observed that about 50% of them had forgiven, and then the other 50% hadn't.
Yes.
And I was trying to identify why that was, but of course, it's beyond comprehension, really. But I just thought that was so fascinating, because of course all healing begins with forgiveness, but at the same time, like you said, the wounds are deep. So.
And in some cases, for some people, they haven't let some of that trauma surface. And so, and kind of goes back to what I was just saying, each table, just like each person, is at a different place in their journey. And so you won't always find people who even want to reconcile. It will be, the narrative will be on resistance, take our power back, and then you'll get someone who is, this has to be about finding common ground and moving forward. So, yeah, and it's a reality even at, tables and places that we're at in the city. I feel we've come a long way, but in reality, in some ways, we are still not fully heard. We're still a minority at those tables. You go to some of the meetings that are very high profile. They're going to dictate how the Indigenous pot of funding is going to be spent, and you might have 50 people in the room, and 2 of us are Indigenous that are voting on priorities. And so that part of it continues.
Right.
And just moving towards influencing the policies, but more importantly, identifying where the clogs in the systems are, and then tackling those.
Yeah.
Just being able to agree on what those clogs are.
Yeah.
And suggesting or encouraging some organizations and people to really self-reflect and say, is it us? Is it how we distribute the funds, in that we haven't, had conversations with Indigenous people as to what your priorities are, but we maintain the purse? And, that's a reality that's been ongoing. And so it's all going to take time. Yeah. So I don't want to take away from the tremendous work that has been done and the movement that we see, but it is tiring, because we're constantly, I feel, having to give, having to share our knowledge, having to be at tables where in the end it doesn't translate to what we need. I've been at meetings and invested a lot of time in conversations, and then I see the document that comes out of it, and there was like no mention of us or one sentence. And you just start to think, well, wow, where was that conversation? I thought people were hearing and, I mean, listening and hearing are different too.
Yeah. Have you seen a shift with the younger generation in terms of their perception of the Western world? Or I suppose it varies with each individual, but I'm just wondering if maybe, of course, yeah, it's probably a difficult question to answer, but I suppose, yeah, in terms of reconciliation and what that means, is there more enthusiasm amongst the younger generation? Or
I've been away from the university for a long time.
Okay.
Since 2011 or 12. I really found that a lot of the younger people that were getting educated were very much more about resistance.
Okay.
And taking control, getting our power back. And that's where a lot of that conversation, because also whereas my dad's generation, even though he went through residential school and, his family being separated from his sisters and being able to see them across the fence and just all of the sad stories that I've heard, not only with my own family, but my dad is always about love. That's how he raised us.
Yeah.
And you interviewed him. He's always about love and about, because he was also in the church, and it's like, turn the other cheek, always give. It's always about healing. But then, there are others who it's that trauma, and they have nothing left to give. There's anger and
valid anger.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I thought it was just sign of the times right now with the Justin Trudeau stuff and Scheer saying something about not accepting Justin's apology. And I was sort of thinking, why would you have to accept the apology, right? Like, where in the heck does that audacity come from?
Yeah.
So
that whole situation.
But that's that's still the reality.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you, how important is it to have a progressive government for your work?
Well, not everyone would agree with me in our communities, but I've actually been quite encouraged for sure with what the Liberal government has offered. But I'm a Green Party girl, right? And so I know that Elizabeth May would the environment, social justice, and, just everything. But housing, it's the first time we have a national housing strategy.
Right.
And one of the three priorities, indigenous. Mm-hmm. The other is women, and particularly those fleeing violence. So in the end, I'm less about the politics of things now. And because I think there is a little bit of good in most, but as far as having support, I don't know that we would have the same support if the Conservatives were in, for sure.
Yeah.
The whole Indigenous question in general in land, and let alone trying to deal with Indigenous homelessness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask too, how are you doing? Just given the fact that, you're carrying a lot of weight with this organization, and every time I talk to you, well, we've been planning this sit down for almost 4 months now, right? And because you're a busy gal, but I just can't imagine just the workload and how taxing it must be, and just how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't sustain. Maybe 2 years of going at this pace. And honestly, I, really have to work weekends as well, evenings. But it means that much to me. And I can't stop. And I can't move on either yet, because when you offer some hope and you see that little light, right?
The light at the end of the tunnel.
The light at the end of the tunnel, yeah. But I can't sustain this pace. I really feel it now, heading into year 4. As I mentioned to you, I was already writing a proposal at 7 this morning. But if we don't write the proposals, we have no funding next year. Right. So there's no core funding for my position.
We need to get you some funding.
We do. We really do. And then taking on the extra work to prepare to open the house. I'm very, very thankful to BC Housing Support and to Atira Women's Resources Society in Vancouver. Janice Abbott and her team have been amazing in mentoring us, but the reality is it's our first house we're opening. It's a demonstration project, and it's culturally supportive housing. There's a lot to do beyond just opening the doors and rooms and, getting staff to have everything in place. So that in itself, it's unbelievable the amount of things you have to be prepared for. Right. We have, monthly meetings with BC Housing, bi-weekly calls with, the contractors, it's a lot of work. And then just trying to find the funds to continue to exist, to do this work and not let the people down. Yeah. And having surveyed them and had focus groups to talk about, their housing needs, what they'd like to see. I can't walk away. But I also have to, remember I have a family, I have grandchildren, I have a brother who's not doing well, but it's all important. It's so important. Yeah. Where I believe we're kind of
I've seen it. I've seen the power. I really have. Yeah. The smiles, the tears, the work that you're doing is incredible. It's been incredibly moving for me. It's been in collaboration with you. That's why I keep showing up.
I know. And I want to acknowledge, your organization and Dan as well, for the time, that initial video that donated all of that time, and then the contribution from the Victoria Foundation. It's those types of things that's what kind of gives me that little spark. And last week we got to meet with 5 of the first 7 women that are being offered the housing. And I couldn't help it. I went home and I just was like dancing. I was so moved, and we had tears and we had laughter, and they'd erupt in clapping. And one woman said to the others, she said, it's so great that I've met some of you at some of the cultural events. And then I've become friends with some of you, but now we're moving into the house and we're going to be a family, Yeah. It's like, oh my God.
That's what keeps you going, right?
I know. Yeah. And I went home and, it was beautiful. It was beautiful to just see and to hear and to be reminded what we take for granted. My gosh, we all go home to our warm houses, and I can jump in my car and, I go and get my groceries, and, I have choice. Yeah. And, a lot of those women tonight are on a shelter mat. And so, there's a lot of work to do, but I'm happier that I am tired. But how am I is the question. I need something to shift soon. Okay. I really do. I feel it just in my own my own emotional and mental ability to keep working at this pace. And I'm so thankful to Bree.
Right.
She is, she's my angel of mercy, I tell you.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it without her.
Yeah.
And yeah.
For folks that are listening, what are you looking for in people that are, you know?
I mean, I would love to build a team of Indigenous men and women to work in the organization. But I'm also about hiring, you know, people that come along that just have the passion and that genuine good heart, and you know when it's there. And so there's that example, right? Bree works with our organization. Well, she was at Royal Roads, and we contacted Royal Roads to see if there were any students that could do some research on youth homelessness, and she and another student did, and I met with them and read the paper, and I just knew then. And that's kind of the same way with trying to build the rest of the team, especially for the house, being able to, you know, select some of those people and to grow them with the organization. So I'm looking for a heart. I'm looking for commitment and a good attitude, because you need to be able to laugh at yourself as well and laugh at each other and make fun of each other because we need that sense of humor,
right.
and we need that good energy,
right.
because you can get caught up. You can just get caught up in the sadness
mm-hmm.
and the death,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And with the house, I'm trying to create a team that will become the experts and the leaders that can provide the in-service as we start to open new housing across the island. And so people that want to be part of something, but really what I didn't realize, and I should have, there aren't a lot of Indigenous people in this field. And I have approached, you know, a couple of the public institutions to say we need to develop a certificate or a diploma in this line of work. Whether we like it or not, it's almost a burgeoning industry across the country because of the reality, and yet we don't have trained people. And I would love to have a program that people could go through with that's similar, like where the credits go towards a social work degree, but a person can specialize in Indigenous housing and homelessness. You know, what are those pathways that lead there, and what are some of the leading practice models, and, you know, and how do you become a manager in this field?
Right.
Because I'll need to find a manager for the house. I'm going to need to find,
you need 3 assistants.
Yeah, exactly. So there's lots to do. But there's no training, and there's limited people that are Indigenous and work in this field. Mm-hmm. So that, again, is another, like a real challenge, too.
Right. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I can imagine, too, with the house, the new house that you're building, that, that lived experience is going to be so important,
mm-hmm.
right? To have
yes.
that Indigenous presence.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's around the corner for the Aboriginal Coalition End Homelessness?
Well, so my hope and where I see us going and where we are going is that this women's housing, it's a demonstration project. And I want to demonstrate we have the answers, we can do it best, and we will do it best. And that we will take those lessons learned and continue to build. But we can't have housing without decolonized harm reduction practice. And I've said it before. Otherwise, we too are part of the problem in that we're just giving people a warm place with a roof over their head to die.
Well, that was what you identified with the Priority 1 program,
That's right?
Is you kept them housed, but you were housing them to die. I think that was your
That's how I feel, that we're not taking it that next step, and we're responsible. And we have to ask those questions, you know, how do we do this? Housing is a first step. it's needed.
Right.
But support in that housing, those cultural supports, the elders, the food, the life skills, the housing in itself are going to end up at the same place. Either people are back on the street, and so that the metrics aren't necessarily honest, because we can use metrics of how many we housed, but we need to be asking the question, how many have
healed
or sustained their housing?
Right.
And then within that context, how many, are okay now? How many have moved towards, healing and recovery? That's where we need to go. But I just don't feel we're there yet. And those conversations, they're happening at little kind of, corners here and there, but the overarching vision for where we need to go, I don't think we're there.
Okay.
And
that's honest.
And I also recognize that if we don't focus on prevention, so really that's our youth, and our youth aging out of ministry care, foster home. If we don't start there, we're only going to inherit them, and that's what's happening. So they're either, hitting the streets or passing away, or even worse, if you don't really know them and they're all of a sudden gone and you're just so busy working with everybody else. I don't know, are they missing? Where did they go? Right? There's no kind of central system to kind of care for everybody, especially between here and, say, the east side in Vancouver. And so I think people also get lost because they
sort of fall through the cracks, right, of the system. And also, too, the indigenous population is the quickest growing population in Canada.
Right. Yes, and has been for a while.
Yeah.
That's right. So this challenge isn't going away. And, the housing situations on reserve, there's also those challenges, or limited land base. You look at some of the communities are boxed in by towns and cities, and they don't have space to even expand. Some people say, well, why don't they just, build more houses on reserve? Well, take a look at some of them and see what they're surrounded by, concrete.
I think you were saying actually that your community was a 20-year waiting list, right?
Yeah. So in my one community, they other than Bill C-31 houses, there was no housing built. And then my sister had been on the housing wait list for years, and that's just the norm. Some communities are getting, it's getting a little bit better, but now more Indigenous people live off reserve than on reserve across the country. And we need to ensure that the systems are ready and adaptable to be able to meet that need too.
How can people get involved? So, website, right? First and foremost, if people want to help in terms of funding, right?
Yes, absolutely. We, we had a donor this past year. It was amazing. And again, that's just how the Creator works. This housing came up, and we have a townhouse that's for families. That's part of it. And how am I going to get all the things we need for children in there? And I just had all these thoughts. How am I going to do this? And we had a very generous donation from a woman and her daughter. It was beautiful. So really, I think what people need to know is a donation of any amount makes a difference, especially without core funding. We have no discretionary funding. So when you're only grant-based, the grants dictate what you have to spend the money on. Some of them don't allow for administration, to help with overhead and that.
Yeah.
So we now have a link on our website where you can donate. And we are formally focusing on creating a plan for volunteers this year, because that will help as well, because we have so many events where we can use the extra hands, or sometimes it's just the outreach on the street, sometimes it's the cooking for the events.
Right.
But where I hope that we get is that whether it's municipal or provincial or federal, that the value in what we do is recognized, and that we, just get the same treatment as some other organizations that either have municipal or provincial funding, because I think we have made a difference already in the knowledge base, the research that we've done, and what we've been able to achieve. We have some other communities that are looking to us and asking questions, and so it does feel frustrating when we don't have that support. So
Yeah.
I'll continue to write proposals and knock on doors, but if you're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, too, I think it's important to mention that Ambrose Place has been a huge success, right? And you spent 4 days there?
Yes, all together now.
Yeah. So, of course, it can be done, and it will be done.
Yes.
It's just a matter of, getting the support.
Yeah.
So it's acehsociety.com.
Correct.
Right? So, folks, if you're listening and you wanna help out,
yes, check out our website. Or also our Facebook page too, at Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness. We update it weekly, and that, I think, if anything, will give you a really good sense of the hard work we're doing on a daily basis and the people that we are reaching. And of course, the videos are really powerful, and I think someone just has to watch those, and you can't help but have your heart touched to know that this is meaningful and it's transformative, and we are a lifeline.
Absolutely.
We are a lifeline,
Yeah.
and that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you,
That
Fran.
wasn't as bad as I thought. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Veracity podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to support us, be sure to like, comment, or share. You can also follow us at Veracity Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for updates and exclusive content. If you're interested in being a featured guest on the show, you can visit our website at veracitypodcast.com and head on down to the Contact Us section. Thanks again for listening. It means so much to us, and stay tuned for more conversations just like this.